The story of the expansion of the United States is one of the most dramatic and transformative chapters in world history. In less than a century after gaining independence, the young nation expanded from a narrow strip of land along the Atlantic Ocean to a vast continental power stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This remarkable growth was not accidental. It was driven by ambition, opportunity, political vision, and sometimes conflict. The bold expansion of the United States reshaped North America and influenced global politics for generations. Understanding how and why this expansion happened reveals the ambitions, challenges, and controversies that defined America's rise. When the United States won independence from Great Britain after the American Revolutionary War in 1783, its territory was relatively small compared to what it would later become. The new nation occupied land along the eastern coast of North America, between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mississippi River. To the west of the Mississippi lay vast lands controlled by European powers, primarily Spain and France. These lands were rich with natural resources, fertile soil, rivers, forests, and opportunities for settlement. Many American leaders believed that the nation's future depended on expanding westward. They envisioned a country of farmers, traders, and pioneers spreading across the continent. One of the most significant moments in American expansion came in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase. At that time, the vast territory, known as Louisiana, belonged to France and was controlled by the powerful French leader Napoleon Bonaparte. The land stretched from the Mississippi River all the way to the Rocky Mountains, covering more than 800,000 square miles. The American president at the time, Thomas Jefferson, recognized the importance of controlling the Mississippi River and the port city of New Orleans. These were vital for trade and transportation for American farmers and merchants. Initially, Jefferson wanted only to buy New Orleans. But in a surprising move, France offered to sell the entire Louisiana territory. For $15 million, the United States doubled its size overnight. This deal remains one of the most famous land purchases in history. After acquiring the Louisiana territory, Americans needed to explore and understand the vast new lands they had gained. In 1804, President Jefferson sent an expedition led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their mission was to explore the new territory, map rivers and mountains, and find a possible route to the Pacific Ocean. This expedition became known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. During their journey, Lewis and Clark traveled thousands of miles across unknown terrain. They encountered many Native American tribes, learned about new plants and animals, and gathered valuable geographic information. Their journey eventually reached the Pacific Ocean near present-day Oregon. This expedition opened the door for future settlers and traders moving west. By the mid-1800s, a powerful belief had emerged among many Americans known as manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was the idea that the United States was destined, by God or by history, to expand across the entire North American continent. Supporters believed that American democracy, culture, and economic systems should spread westward. Newspapers, politicians, and settlers all promoted this idea. However, manifest destiny also brought conflict. Expansion meant that Native American tribes were pushed off their lands, and territories controlled by other countries became targets of American ambition. One of the first major steps in American expansion involved the region of Texas. In the early 1800s, Texas was part of Mexico. Many American settlers moved into the area, encouraged by the Mexican government. Over time, tensions grew between the settlers and Mexican authorities. In 1836, Texas declared independence from Mexico after the famous Texas Revolution. After winning the war, Texas became an independent republic known as the Republic of Texas. 9 years later, in 1845, Texas officially joined the United States. But this decision angered Mexico and set the stage for a much larger conflict. The annexation of Texas eventually led to the Mexican-American War between the United States and Mexico from 1846 to 1848. The war ended with a decisive American victory. As part of the peace agreement known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico gave up an enormous amount of land to the United States. These lands included present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. This dramatically increased the size of the United States and pushed its borders all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Soon after these lands became part of the United States, an event occurred that would bring massive migration westward. In 1848, gold was discovered in California. This discovery triggered the famous California Gold Rush. Hundreds of thousands of people from across America and around the world rushed to California hoping to become rich. Towns appeared almost overnight. Railroads expanded. Trade increased. Within just a few years, California transformed from a remote frontier region into one of the most economically important parts of the country. Although expansion brought wealth and opportunity, it also created deep conflicts. One of the biggest issues was slavery. As new territories joined the United States, political leaders argued over whether slavery would be allowed in those areas. This debate intensified tensions between northern and southern states. These tensions would eventually lead to the American Civil War in 1861. Thus, the story of American expansion is not only about growth and opportunity, but also about political struggles, moral debates, and social change. Despite challenges, the expansion of the United States continued to shape the nation's identity. Pioneers traveled west in wagons, crossing rivers, mountains, and deserts. New railroads connected distant territories to eastern cities. Industries grew, cities expanded, and the population increased rapidly. The idea that America was a land of opportunity attracted immigrants from around the world. Expansion had turned a small coastal republic into a continental nation. By the late 19th century, the United States had already expanded across the North American continent. From the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific coast, the nation had grown dramatically through purchases, wars, treaties, and exploration. But American expansion did not stop there. After the Civil War, the United States began to look beyond its continental borders. Economic growth, industrial power, and strategic interests pushed the nation toward overseas influence. What began as a continental expansion slowly transformed into a global presence. This new phase of expansion reshaped America's role in the world. One of the most surprising expansions occurred in 1867 with the acquisition of Alaska. At the time, Alaska was controlled by Russia. Russian leaders feared that they might lose the territory to Great Britain in a future conflict. Because Alaska was far from Russia and difficult to defend, they decided to sell it. The American Secretary of State, William H. Seward, believed Alaska could be valuable for the future. In 1867, the United States purchased Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. At the time, many Americans mocked the deal. Critics called it Seward's folly or Seward's icebox. They believed the United States had wasted money on a frozen wilderness. However, history proved them wrong. Alaska would later reveal enormous natural resources, including oil, goldfish, and minerals. Today, Alaska is one of the largest and most resource-rich states in the United States. By the late 1800s, the American frontier, the moving line of settlement, pushing westward, had largely disappeared. The famous historian Frederick Jackson Turner argued in 1893 that the frontier had shaped American democracy, independence, and innovation. According to Turner's frontier thesis, the constant movement west had created a unique American character built on exploration, risk-taking, and self-reliance. But once the frontier was gone, many American leaders began to think about expansion beyond the continent. They believed that for economic growth and national strength, the United States needed new markets, naval bases, and international trade routes. One of the first places where American influence expanded overseas was Hawaii. In the late 19th century, American businessmen had already established strong economic ties with the Hawaiian Islands, especially through sugar plantations. Over time, American settlers and business leaders gained increasing political influence. In 1893, a group of American-backed leaders overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy led by Queen Liliuokalani. After several years of political debate, the United States officially annexed Hawaii in 1898. Hawaii's location in the Pacific Ocean made it extremely valuable as a naval base and a gateway for American trade with Asia. Today, Hawaii remains an important strategic and cultural part of the United States. The turning point that transformed the United States into a global power came with the Spanish-American War in 1898. At the time, Spain still controlled several colonies around the world, including Cuba and the Philippines. In Cuba, a rebellion had begun against Spanish rule. Many Americans supported the Cuban struggle for independence. Tensions between the United States and Spain grew dramatically after the mysterious explosion of the American battleship USS Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898. Although the exact cause of the explosion was never fully proven, American newspapers blamed Spain, fueling public anger. Soon after, the United States declared war. The Spanish-American War lasted only a few months, but its impact was enormous. American forces quickly defeated Spain in both the Caribbean and the Pacific. One of the most important battles occurred in the Philippines, where American naval forces led by George Dewey destroyed the Spanish fleet in the Battle of Manila Bay. In the Caribbean, American troops, including the famous Rough Riders led by Theodore Roosevelt, won key victories in Cuba. By the end of the war, Spain had been decisively defeated. The war officially ended with the Treaty of Paris, 1898. Under this agreement, Spain surrendered several territories to the United States. These included Puerto Rico, Guam, Philippines. Meanwhile, Cuba became independent but remained under strong American influence. For the first time in its history, the United States now controlled territories far beyond North America. This marked the beginning of America's role as a global imperial power. However, not all Americans supported overseas expansion. A major national debate began over whether the United States should control foreign territories. Some leaders believed imperial expansion was necessary for economic growth and national security. Others argued that controlling foreign lands went against American democratic values. The American Anti-Imperialist League formed to oppose expansion. Prominent figures such as Mark Twain criticized the idea of the United States ruling other nations. Despite the opposition, the United States maintained control of its new territories. One of the most controversial outcomes of the Spanish-American War occurred in the Philippines. Filipino leaders had hoped that American forces would help them gain independence from Spain. However, when the United States decided to keep control of the islands, conflict erupted. This led to the Philippine-American War, which lasted from 1899 to 1902. The war was brutal and costly, causing heavy casualties on both sides. Eventually, the United States established control over the Philippines, although independence would not come until 1946. By the early 20th century, the United States had transformed dramatically. What began as a small nation along the Atlantic coast had become a continental power and now an emerging global force. Its navy sailed across oceans. Its industries produced goods for world markets. Its influence reached into the Caribbean, the Pacific, and beyond. American expansion had moved from westward settlement to international power. The nation was entering a new era, one in which its actions would increasingly shape global events. By the beginning of the 20th century, the United States had already expanded across North America and acquired several overseas territories. However, American leaders believed that for the country to become a true global power, it needed stronger international influence, faster trade routes, and a powerful navy. During this time, the United States began shaping world events more directly. Economic strength, military power, and strategic diplomacy all contributed to the nation's growing role in global affairs. This era marked the transformation of the United States from a continental nation into a powerful global actor. One of the most influential leaders during this period was Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt believed that the United States should play a strong role in international politics. His famous foreign policy philosophy was summarized by the phrase, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." This approach meant that diplomacy should be used whenever possible, but military power should always be ready if needed. Roosevelt strengthened the American Navy and expanded the country's influence, particularly in Latin America and the Pacific region. His policies helped establish the United States as a major force in global diplomacy. One of the most important achievements of this era was the construction of the Panama Canal. Before the canal existed, ships traveling between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean had to sail all the way around South America, passing the dangerous waters of Cape Horn. This journey could take several months. American leaders realized that a canal across Central America would dramatically shorten global shipping routes. Initially, the canal project was attempted by France, but failed due to financial problems and deadly tropical diseases. Later, the United States took over the project. In 1903, the United States supported the independence of Panama from Colombia, allowing America to gain control of the canal zone. Construction began soon afterward. Building the Panama Canal was one of the greatest engineering challenges in history. Workers had to dig through dense jungles, mountains, and swampy terrain. Diseases such as malaria and yellow fever had previously killed thousands of workers during earlier attempts to build the canal. American doctors and scientists introduced new sanitation systems that helped control mosquitoes and reduce the spread of disease. After more than a decade of construction, the canal finally opened in 1914. The Panama Canal immediately transformed global trade. Ships could now travel between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in a fraction of the time previously required. For the United States, the canal became both a strategic military asset and a powerful economic advantage. During the early 20th century, the United States expanded its influence throughout Latin America. Through policies such as the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, the United States declared that it had the right to intervene in the affairs of nations in the Western Hemisphere if instability threatened American interests. This policy led to American involvement in several countries, including Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, Dominican Republic. American troops and economic advisors were often sent to stabilize governments, protect investments, and maintain regional influence. Supporters argued that these actions protected democracy and economic stability, while critics believed they represented unfair interference in the sovereignty of other nations. During this time, the United States invested heavily in building a powerful navy. Influenced by naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan, American leaders believed that global power depended on control of the seas. As a result, the United States constructed modern battleships and expanded its naval bases across the Pacific and Caribbean. In 1907, President Theodore Roosevelt sent a fleet of American battleships on a worldwide tour known as the Great White Fleet. The fleet visited ports across the globe, demonstrating American naval strength. This display signaled to the world that the United States had become a major maritime power. The next major turning point in American global influence came with the World War I. When the war began in 1914, the United States initially remained neutral. However, economic ties with European nations and attacks on American shipping gradually drew the country closer to involvement. One major factor was Germany's use of submarine warfare against ships in the Atlantic Ocean. In 1915, a German submarine sank the passenger ship RMS Lusitania, killing many civilians, including American passengers. Another turning point came with the discovery of the Zimmermann-Telegramm in 1917. In this secret message, Germany encouraged Mexico to join the war against the United States. When the message became public, American anger grew rapidly. Soon afterward, the United States declared war on Germany. The arrival of American soldiers in Europe dramatically shifted the balance of the war. Fresh troops, supplies, and financial support strengthened the Allied forces. In 1918, the Allies achieved victory, bringing an end to the devastating conflict. The war concluded with the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Although the United States played a major role in the victory, the country soon returned to a more limited international involvement during the 1920s. However, the war had already demonstrated something important. The United States now possessed the economic strength, military capability, and global influence necessary to shape world events. By the end of this period, the United States had changed dramatically. What began as a small nation of former colonies had grown into a continental empire and an emerging world power. Its economy was one of the largest in the world. Its navy sailed across global oceans. Its political influence extended far beyond North America. The expansion that began with pioneers moving west had evolved into something much larger: global influence, international alliances, and worldwide economic power. America's bold expansion had entered a new phase, one that would define the 20th century. By the early 20th century, the United States had already become an influential nation with growing military and economic power. However, the events of the mid-20th century would elevate the country to an entirely new level of global influence. Two massive global conflicts reshaped the world order. By the end of these events, the United States emerged not just as a powerful nation, but as one of the most dominant forces in global politics. This period marked the transformation of America into a true superpower. After the end of World War I, many Americans hoped to avoid future international conflicts. The country focused on domestic economic growth during the 1920s. However, the global situation changed dramatically during the 1930s. In Germany, the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime created tensions across Europe. At the same time, Japan expanded aggressively in Asia, and Italy pursued its own imperial ambitions. These developments eventually led to the outbreak of World War II in 1939. Initially, the United States again attempted to remain neutral, but events soon made neutrality impossible. On December 7, 1941, Japanese forces launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The attack destroyed several ships and aircraft and killed more than 2,000 American service members. The following day, the United States officially declared war on Japan. Soon afterward, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, bringing America fully into World War II. This moment marked a dramatic turning point in American history. During World War II, the United States transformed into what President Franklin D. Roosevelt famously called the arsenal of democracy. American factories produced enormous quantities of military equipment, including tanks, aircraft, ships, weapons and ammunition. The industrial capacity of the United States became one of the key reasons the Allied forces were able to defeat their enemies. American soldiers fought in major campaigns across Europe and the Pacific. Key battles took place in places such as Normandy during the D-Day invasion, Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. These battles were intense and costly, but they eventually pushed Axis forces toward defeat. In Europe, the war ended in May 1945 after the defeat of Nazi Germany. However, the conflict continued in the Pacific against Japan. In August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Shortly afterward, Japan surrendered, bringing World War II to an end. The war had caused massive destruction across much of the world. But unlike many countries, the United States emerged from the war with its economy stronger than ever. Its industries were booming, its military was powerful, and its global influence had increased dramatically. After the war, the international system changed dramatically. The United States played a leading role in establishing the United Nations in 1945, an organization designed to promote peace and cooperation among nations. American leaders also helped rebuild war-torn Europe through a major economic assistance program known as the Marshall Plan. Billions of dollars were invested to rebuild infrastructure, industries, and economies across Western Europe. This assistance helped stabilize democratic governments and strengthen alliances between the United States and European nations. Despite the victory in World War II, a new global conflict soon emerged. The United States and the Soviet Union became rivals in what became known as the Cold War. Unlike previous wars, the Cold War was not fought through direct, large-scale battles between the two superpowers. Instead, it involved political competition, military alliances, technological rivalry, and proxy conflicts around the world. The United States supported democratic and capitalist systems, while the Soviet Union promoted communist ideology. This rivalry shaped international politics for nearly half a century. In order to strengthen collective security, the United States helped form a military alliance, known as NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in 1949. The alliance included the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations. The principle behind NATO was simple but powerful. An attack on one member would be considered an attack on all. This alliance became one of the most important military partnerships in modern history. During the Cold War, the United States established military bases and alliances around the world. American influence expanded across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Latin America. The country also invested heavily in scientific research and technological development. One of the most famous competitions of the Cold War was the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. This rivalry eventually led to the historic Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969, when astronauts from the United States became the first humans to land on the moon. By the second half of the 20th century, the United States had become one of the two dominant superpowers in the world. Its economy was among the largest on the planet. Its military strength was unmatched in many areas, Its culture, technology, and political influence spread across the globe. The expansion that began with settlers crossing the American frontier had evolved into worldwide influence in diplomacy, economics, science, and security. The United States had truly become a global power. By the late 20th century, the United States had already established itself as one of the most powerful nations in the world. Decades of economic growth, military strength, and global alliances had placed the country at the center of international politics. However, one final event would dramatically reshape global power. That event was the end of the Cold War. This moment would mark the beginning of a new era in which the United States stood as the world's most influential superpower. For nearly half a century, the world had been divided between two powerful rivals, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both nations competed in military strength, nuclear weapons, political ideology, and technological advancement. But by the 1980s, serious problems began to weaken the Soviet system. Economic struggles, political pressure, and internal reforms under Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev created major changes inside the Soviet Union. Reforms such as glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, were intended to modernize the Soviet system. However, these reforms also encouraged political movements demanding greater freedom. Across Eastern Europe, communist governments began to collapse. One of the most symbolic moments of the Cold War occurred in 1989, with the fall of the Berlin Wall. For decades, the wall had divided the city of Berlin into two parts. East Berlin, controlled by the Soviet-aligned government, and West Berlin aligned with the democratic nations of the West. The wall had become a powerful symbol of the division between communist and democratic worlds. When protests and political reforms spread across Eastern Europe, pressure grew on the East German government. Finally, in November 1989, the border opened. Crowds gathered, and people began tearing down sections of the Berlin Wall. This moment symbolized the collapse of the old Cold War divisions. Just 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. 15 independent nations emerged from the former Soviet territory. With the collapse of its main rival, the United States became the world's only remaining superpower. Many political analysts describe this moment as the beginning of a unipolar world, where one nation held unmatched global influence. After the Cold War, the United States continued to play a central role in global affairs. American leadership influenced international institutions, economic systems, and military alliances. Organizations such as the United Nations and NATO often worked closely with American policies and initiatives. The United States also became a dominant force in global trade and technological innovation. American companies, universities, and research institutions helped lead major advances in science, medicine, and communication. Cities such as Silicon Valley became centers of technological innovation that shaped the modern digital world. Another major turning point in modern American history occurred on September 11, 2001. On that day, terrorists associated with the organization Al-Qaeda carried out coordinated attacks on the United States. 2 airplanes struck the World Trade Center in New York City, while another hit the Pentagon near Washington, D.C. These attacks shocked the world and led the United States to launch what became known as the War on Terror. American forces began military operations in Afghanistan and later in Iraq. These conflicts shaped global politics for many years and demonstrated the continuing influence of the United States in international security matters. Beyond military power, the United States has also exercised enormous cultural and economic influence around the world. American movies, music, and technology have reached global audiences. Companies such as Apple, Microsoft, and Google have transformed communication, computing, and digital life worldwide. Hollywood films, American universities, and international media networks have helped spread American culture and ideas to nearly every corner of the globe. This cultural influence is sometimes described as soft power, meaning influence achieved through attraction rather than force. Despite its global influence, the United States faces new challenges in the modern era. Rising economic powers such as China and regional powers around the world have created a more complex international system. Global issues such as climate change, cybersecurity, economic competition, and technological transformation are shaping the future of international relations. At the same time, debates continue within the United States about the role the country should play in global affairs. Some believe the nation should maintain strong international leadership, while others argue for focusing more on domestic priorities. Looking back over more than 2 centuries, the story of American expansion is remarkable. The nation began as a small collection of colonies along the Atlantic coast. Through exploration, settlement, diplomacy, and conflict, it expanded across the North American continent. Later, through economic growth, military power, and international alliances, it became a global leader. From the early days of westward settlement to its modern role in world affairs, the expansion of the United States has shaped global history. The story of America's bold expansion is not only about territory, it is also a story about influence, ambition, innovation, and global leadership. From the purchase of vast lands, such as Louisiana, to the construction of strategic projects like the Panama Canal, from victories in global conflicts to leadership in technology and culture, the United States has continuously reshaped its role in the world. Today, the legacy of that expansion continues to shape international politics, economics, and culture. The future remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. The bold expansion of the United States has left a lasting impact on the course of global history.